This Blessed Union by T-Drop. Narrated by Michael Hagiantonis. When Leo sluggishly rolled over in bed the next day, he was slightly horrified to see that it was nearly mid-morning. He routinely rose with the sun, or before it, and sleeping in any later threw him off in a grand way. Leo shot an accusatory glare at the empty potion bottle sitting on his bedside table. With great effort, he climbed out of bed and readied himself for the day, washed his face, combed his hair, and dressed in a loose tunic and short breeches. He hardly ever wore shoes, and welcomed the warm burn of the sun-soaked stone floor under his feet as he walked through the hallway. Leo wanted to go down to the dining room to partake of the fresh fruit in the centre of the table, but he was too concerned that King Theor might be there. Wanting to avoid his father, Leo escaped to the balcony and descended the outer stairs that led to the garden beside the villa. After the storm last night, the air seemed fresh, as if the entire outdoors had been washed clean. The flagstone pathways were cooler underfoot, shaded by the bushes and plants on either side. Leo followed them up to a modest glass building that stood at the end of the garden. He spoke a rune word once he reached the large metal door, and he heard the lock lifting on the other side. Leo pushed through and stepped into the thick and heavy air of a greenhouse. It was a miniature jungle thriving within the circle of glass walls. Large shelves stood everywhere, holding pots and troughs of every size and shape, from which grew a dizzying variety of plant life. Greenery poured out to trail down to the floor, spiraled wildly into the air, or climbed the walls to cast shade from the domed glass roof overhead. Along the far wall was a more organized area, with rows of smaller plants growing in pleasant uniformity in their shelves. The entire building was a beautifully chaotic sea of green, with splashes of color from flowers, buds, and fruits constantly washed in the bright light of the sun. Leo eagerly plucked a few bright red berries from a sprawling vine he passed, then picked a few leaves from one neatly symmetrical plant. He twisted 2 big green pods off a bush as well, and bit into one, relishing in the fresh, crisp taste as the thin shell collapsed. Shay would have scolded him for not waiting until they had turned yellow, but Leo preferred the pods before their sweetness was dulled by age. He piled everything on a massive leaf that had fallen from a tree, using it as a bowl, and then sat down on a wooden bench by the workstation. Vats of soil, potion jars, and crates of gardening equipment filled this corner, with a long, earth-stained table in the centre. Leo popped one of the red fruits into his mouth with a few leaves, and found himself staring at the table longingly. This was Shay's greenhouse. He'd stand at that table for hours planting new trays of seedlings, transferring plants that had outgrown their pots, or pouring out potions on ailing leaves and stems. Not everyone lived their trade, but Shay absolutely did. He was never entirely satisfied with a day, unless he'd dirtied his hands in the earth. He'd been gone on an intense botanical supply run for weeks, stocking his entire fleet from sources across several countries. Leo missed him dreadfully right now, wishing he'd been able to speak with him longer. Everything seemed easier when Shay was around to spread his infectiously light-hearted attitude. The giant lock opened again with a loud creaking of metal, startling Leo so much he nearly dropped his remaining fruit. He was briefly afraid King Theor had tracked him down, before remembering only 3 of them knew the rune word combination to Shay's cherished greenhouse.
"Leo, are you in here?"
He relaxed. "Yes, in the back," Leo answered, and Isaac appeared a second later, ducking beneath some low-hanging vines.
"I thought you might hide in here to poach something,"
he teased, before holding up a plate and a large tin mug.
"Not to fret. I brought you breakfast so you can avoid the dining room."
Leo ate his last fruit quickly and tossed the giant leaf aside, reaching for the plate of pastries, cheese, and bacon. He also gratefully seized his favourite mug for chilled coffee. "Bless you, Dad." Isaac sat down beside him as Leo bit into a pastry and washed it down with the coffee. The bitterness was balanced by sweetness and cream, and the familiar taste instantly cheered Leo's heart. He'd helped Shay nurture the coffee trees in this very greenhouse his entire life. "The fan is rusting," Isaac observed, peering up at the large spinning blades behind the grate in a lower ceiling panel. "Perhaps we should return to using wind runes if it finally gives out. Runes can't rust." Leo rolled his eyes, taking a large bite of bacon and cheese. He could vaguely remember a time as a young child when runes were the only option, before mechanisms and new phrases were discovered to increase their efficiency. Isaac had always been wary of these integrations, and without Shay's love of newfangled advancements, he might have ignored them until being ultimately forced to adapt. Despite this mindset, Isaac was the one who had purchased the greenhouse fan as a gift. They had all worked together to install it 6 years ago, the very morning King Theo arrived without notice. "Where is the king most likely to lurk the rest of the day?" Leo asked between bites. "How can I best avoid him?"
"Who's to say? He's a guest in our home, and we must respect that," Isaac admitted shortly. "Though nothing would bring me more pleasure than to toss him out into the courtyard, along with all his infernal guards."
"Enjoy being stunned senseless and drooling all over the rug?"
"I think I could take them," postured Isaac, smiling. "I hadn't forgotten how to ward myself."
"Have you secretly learned some warding spell strong enough to block a stunner?" Leo asked, amused. "If such a combination of runes does exist, it must be a tightly kept secret." Isaac shrugged.
"Perhaps I'll simply drug their tea to keep it fair."
Leo chortled. "You truly are asking for a stint in a cell."
"Shay would break me out,"
Isaac predicted nonchalantly. "True," Leo agreed, just as casually. "But we'd have to tell him about it first. I talked to him last night, but something broke the connection. He said their voice stones have been failing." Isaac frowned, mouth twisting in concern.
"You were more fortunate than me. I couldn't even connect with him when I tried."
"I can't think of anything that would cause such a disruption in the linking energies," Leo worried. "Besides the Strait of Oblivion, but he's nowhere near there."
"Some dratted new contraption for cutting off communication, maybe," suggested Isaac. "I've heard speculation about that recently. Unless it's something mundane, like innocent bumbling from that mad crew of his."
"Mad enough to save his life, and each other's countless times," Leo smirked. "You just aren't thrilled that they see Shay almost more than we do." Isaac straightened up, pulling a purposefully pompous face.
"What can I say? I'm easily jealous when it comes to my one and only soulmate. So, mad the crew is, or I'll become unhealthily possessive."
Leo gave a short laugh, and it felt better than anything had since last night. Isaac grinned as well, picking up the green pod that Leo had set aside and biting into it. They sat and ate together for a few moments, listening to the birds and tree skimmers chirping in the surrounding trees.
"You didn't sleep well, did you?"
Isaac asked gently a few moments later.
"There are circles beneath your eyes."
"I did," Leo confirmed wearily. "But it took 3 doses of slumber potion."
"Deep slumber, rather than regular?"
Leo nodded, and Isaac hummed.
I don't blame you, but did you really need that much?"
"One wasn't enough," Leo said, around the lip of his mug. "Neither was the second an hour later. The storm saw to that." Isaac's brown eyes went softer with sympathy.
"I'm so sorry. It's been years since you've needed potion at all, let alone that much. How has it left you feeling?"
"Like I was forced to get some sleep." Isaac shook his head, leaning an elbow on the back of the bench and propping up his chin in a hand.
Better than going without sleep entirely. I could have used a dose of that myself, if I'm honest.
"Now we better brew up a few more bottles then," Leo said wearily, "because I don't know how else I'll sleep in the foreseeable future."
"It's all a mess, isn't it?"
Isaac asked, quietly, after they'd let the silence absorb that comment and weigh it down.
"I certainly didn't help, losing my temper so dramatically."
Leo managed a tiny grin. "I'd probably think you were ill if you didn't react like that. A short fuse is your defining feature."
"Simply pitiful, isn't it?"
Isaac chuckled.
"You'd think by this age I'd have learned restraint, without Shay here to calm me down. Did you know? Right from the start, he told me he was my greatest weakness."
"Why?" Leo asked, playfully. "Because he can butter you up like no one else on this mortal plane." A fond look came into Isaac's eyes.
"Well, there is that," he mused. "But what he meant was that if I always relied on him to keep me in check, I'd never gain control for myself. He was always the wiser of us, even back then. Though when we met, I was young, conceited, and undisciplined enough that I consider my current temperament tame by comparison. Shay's maturity was fated to be leagues greater than mine."
Leo raised an eyebrow at his uncle. "Don't tell me you're admitting his wisdom now, after all these years of calling him an intolerable mongrel perpetually stuck at 16.
"That he is," Isaac said firmly. "But we both know the truth, Leonardo. Shay showed his insightfulness from the first day we met. Even while we were courting, he recognized that my temper could be an issue if I always used him as a crutch."
Isaac gave a dejected exhale and held up his hands helplessly.
"But here we are, 20-odd years later, and I still can't maintain a level head without him."
"In all fairness," Leo said grimly, "anyone in our situation would lash out, whether or not they had temper issues. Shay might have reacted worse than you did when he heard what the king wanted. I actually lashed out too after you left us alone. I used a warning fist."
Isaac cocked his head, intrigued. "Oh, that's unlike you. How did he incite such a reaction?"
"I don't want you to get angry and flip the bench over," Leo said dryly. "I'd spill my breakfast everywhere."
"I haven't flipped anything over in years,"
Isaac protested with a smile. "True, you mostly just shout a lot. So, please don't deafen me if I tell you why King Theor upset me, all right?"
"Fair enough,"
conceded Isaac, sitting back and waiting for Leo to explain. Leo braced himself with another swallow of coffee. He asked me about my romantic interests, whether or not I was attached, and might therefore have more difficulty accepting the proposal."
"The vile, insidious son of a—"
"Please don't start cursing," Leo implored, rubbing at his temple. "I can't handle that right now." Isaac nodded his agreement, lips twisted slightly as he forced himself to stay calm.
"He has no right to question you about something so personal."
"That is why I gave him a warning fist." Satisfaction edged Leo's voice. He did not ask again.
"Excellent, my boy."
Isaac almost made Leo spill his coffee by clapping him proudly on the shoulder. It did nothing but make him speak the truth faster, Leo said, deflating a bit, which was far better than his attempts at politeness. Putting aside his interpersonal skills, or lack thereof, he's not an incompetent ruler by any stretch of the means. His strategic abilities are extensive, but perhaps that is what makes him a terrible family member.
"Royals,"
scoffed Isaac.
"Most of us are raised to believe our word is divine. It's no wonder so many turn out as arrogant as that man, including my siblings and I. Had Shay not crossed my path, I never would have escaped that selfish mindset. It saddens me that I am the only one of my family to be so fortunate, including your late mother.
Leo felt his heart jump before sinking into the pit of his stomach. His breakfast was beginning to lose its flavour. Isaac's voice quieted as he went on.
The only comfort I have, remembering her in life, is that at least she was as haughty and egotistical as her husband. So they truly did care for each other very much.
Isaac rarely spoke about his sister, Leo's mother, and Leo had never been sure how to feel when he did. Even with Isaac's claims that she had been calculating and self-centered, and even knowing that she had never wanted him, Leo still harboured a strange grief, knowing that he'd never meet her. Had her death occurred years before King Theor's first visit, he felt the sting of the loss might be lessened. As it was, he'd missed her by less than a month. Leo's feelings on the matter remained a nebulous sense of pain and frustration.
I wish better for my remaining brothers and sisters,
Isaac continued sadly, expression shuttering for a moment.
If only they could find good, down-to-earth influences, romantic or not, as I did. But for now they're just as vain and pampered as ever. I'm the outlier of the family, thanks to Shay, and I still struggle with my old mentalities.
Raising me can't have helped, Leo said, wishing to move beyond talk of relatives that he'd never met, and the complicated feelings aligned with the topic.
On the contrary, it helped more than anything,
Isaac countered earnestly.
Nothing forced me to be more selfless than being responsible for a tiny life. I had to be dedicated, because I wanted to raise the sweetest, kindest child possible, free of the entitlement and arrogance that royal brats are born into. I'd say that I succeeded, though you inherited far more of Shay's boundless spirit than I'd anticipated.
Leo smiled happily at that, and dropped the empty plate onto the bench between them, cupping the mug in both hands. It was a cool relief in the heat of the greenhouse.
I'm sorry for the sentimental detour, let's back up a bit,
Isaac said, his tone becoming serious.
What else did you and Theo discuss after I was thrown from the room like some vagabond?
You didn't listen at the door, Leo asked, slightly chiding, trying to hold off the questions he knew were coming.
The guards kept me too far away to eavesdrop, or I would have,
Isaac admitted shamelessly. They made the right decision, you know, banning you from the room. Your temper would have only grown worse had you stayed.
Don't get smart with me, young man,
Isaac half teased.
Tell me exactly what was said. There's an angle to all this, isn't there? Something he revealed to you once I was out of the way.
The dwindling coffee at the bottom of his tin mug was suddenly very interesting to Leo, as he answered. You didn't miss much. He just reiterated what you'd already heard about travelling to Spa to make my refusal known to the advisors. Once I'd done that, I can come home. Isaac's eyes narrowed.
Just like that? No other conditions?
Leo let out a small, tight sigh, and rubbed his eyes. Not quite. Isaac's expression turned suspicious, and his tone threatening.
I knew it. What will he do to you if you say no?
Nothing, Leo answered honestly. He will quite literally have nothing to do with me if I refuse. He said that if I walk away from this opportunity, he will never reinstate my royal status, under any circumstances.
That is all?
Isaac asked, dark eyebrows furrowed.
What weight could that have to sway you? Your status is not something that you desire, so why use that as a threat? Is he delusional? He has to be scheming something greater.
Leo looked away, staring up at the glass ceiling and tapping a fingernail on the side of his mug. Was there something else, Leo? Some underlying fact that you're not telling me? He chewed on the inside of his cheek for a second. No, but that ultimatum was enough. My boy, that is not an ultimatum, it is a laugh, Isaac insisted. Theo needs you to go through with this marriage for his own plans to succeed. Unless there really is another faith promise comparable to you that he has concealed from us. There is not. He's gambling everything on me. He lost before he even made the trip then, Isaac scoffed. He has to know you care nothing for your birthright. Leo's stomach was squirming suddenly in the face of this discussion and how it might end. He couldn't back out of it now, so he took the first plunge with a deep breath. I have no desire for power or position in itself, but I have sometimes considered what might be possible if I had any scrap of real influence. Has that thought never crossed your mind before, Dad? Of what good I could potentially do as Aldonia's prince? A concerned look came across Isaac's face, and he shook his head. Even if I had, what good could you possibly do now, if your princedom simply changes hands from one king to the next? I doubt that King Reinhairs would allow you to have any hand in his political dealings. Perhaps not, Leo agreed slowly. I have no way of knowing what, if any, role I'll be expected to play if I married him. Still, there is a chance that I would have more freedom in Spa than I would here, if we're talking strictly in measures of authority. I could possibly have more influence outside my own country than within it. I might be capable of accomplishing more, Leonardo, Isaac said sharply, cutting him off. I am astounded that you are saying this. There is no agenda that will be worth playing a willing pawn in King Theor's sick game. Leo tried to count to 10 in his head as he saw Isaac's understanding slipping behind a curtain of emotion. He only made it to 3 before he spoke again, tensely. What I'm trying to say is that this isn't just some twisted game between me and my father, however it appears. This could be a monumental step forward for both Aldonia and Spa. King Theo is undoubtedly deceitful, but this peace treaty, it's real. Have you stopped to think about what it would mean to have both countries united by marriage, in addition to the new terms? That seemed to give Isaac pause, his dark eyes lowering in consideration. Leo used that brief hesitation to continue. This isn't just about my own future, it's about Aldonia's. I grew up hearing your stories of just how brutal our people and the Sparians were to one another. I remember how often you described it as an uphill social battle, trying to dissolve the animosity from decades of needless fighting with Spa. Did you not raise me to clearly see that our prejudices are unwarranted? Isaac shifted uncomfortably, brows still furrowed, mouth twitching like he wanted to retort but couldn't quite find his argument yet. Leo kept going, while he had the upper hand. He was shocked to hear how much conviction flooded his voice as he spoke, finding with each and every word that he meant them. They'd been rattling about as incoherent jabbering in his brain since last night, but were finally being ordered as they left his mouth. I don't want to roll over and play into his schemes, but I cannot believe this is just some petty personal attack. There's too much at stake. Take what King Theo has done to us entirely from the scenario. What then are you left with? A legitimate prospect to ensure a more peaceful and trustworthy relationship between two nations whose feud has affected every citizen alive. You cannot take Theo, or how poorly he's treated you, out of the picture. That is my point, Isaac responded angrily, having clearly gathered himself. What do you owe him? Or this country, for that matter? Your own people rejected you, along with their king. I care not how far our understanding has grown since then.
Superstitions have not simply evaporated in a mere half a lifetime. If you were to be thrust before Aldonians tomorrow and reinstated as their prince, do you think they would fling themselves at your feet and beg your forgiveness?
Leo clenched his teeth in frustration. I'm not an idiot, Dad. I have no illusions of instant reform. But I cannot ignore that there might be positive outcomes were I handed back my birthright. Just the idea that King Theo would present me my princedom again in order to use me as a symbol of unity after stoically rejecting me. Even if it only means I'm the last card in his deck, that concept alone is so remarkable. Do you not think that is enough to sway superstitious opinions on... Leo felt his determination dying out as he saw Isaac's expression becoming guarded and calm. It made him nervous when Isaac grew still in the midst of a discussion. When he realized what that expression really was, he felt even worse. It was pity. Oh, that's how he's gotten to you, the mastermind. Isaac's tone was now too soft, too patient for Leo's comfortability. He's spun you some farce about being accepted as a Faeblood, hasn't he? Exposing the superstition for the lie it is. A possibility is not the same as a farce, Leo stated tightly, trying not to sound defensive. When Isaac spoke again, he sounded almost like he was trying to reason with a child, his cadence slow and non-threatening. I hate seeing him rile you up so much. Your eyes. Leo turned his face away swiftly, irritated and rubbing his eyelids before he could think about it. Isaac went on. I can see why such a thought would tug at your heart. But Leo, even with all the knowledge we've gained over the last 20 years, some ideas simply cannot be killed. Descendants of the Fae are cursed in Aldonia. Nothing, not other countries pointing out how untrue this is, or the other chives flooding us with knowledge, or our very own hearts, has been able to change that belief. It would not surprise me if the citizens would think you marrying King Reinhairs is a bad omen. 2 Faebloods joined by political arrangement? That just spells disaster by the old way of thinking. That is exactly what I wish to change, Leo insisted. Faeblood are rare, but there must be at least a few every generation, if we're talking statistically. What happens to those children born to families who don't have wealthy royal family members to pass them off to, like my father did? How many are abandoned by their own parents, and what kind of life do they lead afterward? All at the hands of some unfounded superstition. For the sake of being harsh, Leo, said Isaac, still sounding infuriatingly patient. Problems of that magnitude are not yours to repair. You carry no burden of responsibility to this country after what it's done to you. How can you say I have no responsibility to others of my own kind, if not my countrymen? Leo demanded. Isaac paused to rub at the bridge of his nose aggressively. Leo, I think Theo has gotten into your head by way of your heart. He's planted that narrative in your mind, dazzled you with delusions of a better future that can only come about if you cooperate. He's playing dirty, taking advantage of your most obvious weakness. My thoughts are my own, answered Leo bitterly, feeling an old, unsettled score rising to the forefront of his mind and pushing back the matter at hand. You cannot say what might have been planted in my head when you have no idea the kind of thoughts I've had in my life. Leo, please. I think you're a bit old to be speaking like an angsty. Do you have any idea how long I spent as a child staring at my own eyes in the mirror, just trying to understand? Leo snapped, insulted by Isaac's placating tone. Do you think I could have ever gone up to you when I was older and told you I wanted to campaign for Faeblood in the streets?
What opportunities did you ever offer me to meet with other Faeblood, or to try to make any difference on our behalf? You were so dedicated to keeping me safe and happy that you couldn't see how suffocated I was, doing nothing to challenge the lies. What other choice did I have but to fantasize about what I would do for Faeblood if I could be the rightful prince that I am?
If Isaac was shocked by Leo's sudden confessions, he hid it well behind a mask of almost insulting patience. It made Leo even angrier.
Think about what you were saying,
Isaac urged. To his morbid satisfaction, Leo could hear the stress in his voice.
You can insist and shout that this might have been a dream of yours all you'd like. But are you forgetting that what King Theo really wants is for you to marry yourself off to a complete stranger? In a freezing tundra of a country far away from everything you've ever known? Has the thought of some vague political power blinded you to that reality?
Leo took a cleansing breath or two, slightly dousing the angry fire that was blazing within him. Trust me, Isaac. I am intensely aware of it. Isaac watched him for a moment, before the pity melted away from his face, only to be replaced with horror. It was as if he'd thought their words mere banter before, and it was just now hitting him exactly what Leo had been saying. Again, Leo morbidly enjoyed seeing the moment when his words sank in.
By the gods, Leo. Are you actually considering this proposal?
Leo tried to contemplate how to answer that question, but no more rational arguments came to mind that he hadn't already expressed. So he answered simply, I am weighing the possible outcomes. Isaac was visibly shaken now, rubbing his mouth, huffing out disbelieving breaths and shaking his head in turns. He spoke as though thinking aloud to himself.
I cannot believe my ears. I never thought, after adopting you out of that realm of entitlement and backstabbing, that you'd want to run straight back to it.
That hit Leo hard enough to make him snap again. He turned angry, blazing eyes on Isaac and demanded,
Do you think that I don't understand the gravity of this decision? Have you even heard one word that I've said?
Isaac came back with just as much aggression.
All I hear is your father, playing you like a puppet. He's done so much to wound you, but this mental trickery is too difficult to witness.
I have not been tricked,
Leo blurted, rising to his feet and flinging his hands into the air.
I can see his game clearly, and I know how he's manipulating me, but that doesn't mean that Aldonia still doesn't need a new peace treaty, or that the other Faeblood don't need a voice. I'm not a fool, Isaac, but I see the possibilities presented to me, and I would be a fool to toss them away on sheer reflex.
He tossed you away,
Isaac cried, standing as well.
A harmless babe that posed no threat apart from social outcry, and he gave you up on that alone. I will not give you back to him after all this time. You have agency over an entire future that you would never have had without Shay and I interceding to give it to you. I cannot let Theo take that all away, much less watch you hand it over for the sake of some fantasy. I will not allow you to do this.
Isaac's words actually cut Leo to the quick, and made his heart ache for all the love he knew was behind them. Yet they were still not what Leo needed to hear. The two of them stood for a moment, with slightly hyper breathing, tension rising in the absence of words. Leo hesitated to say what he felt, unsure what would happen once he did. He sensed the emotional precipice that he might be about to fall from, but saw no alternative but to take the risk. He gathered his courage and finally spoke, very soft and slow, through a voice shaking with emotion and conviction. Isaac, I love you and Shay so much, and I thoroughly understand what it meant for you to adopt me and raise me the way you have.
You're the most incredible parents anyone could wish for. And I don't tell you that enough." He stalled, needing to look away from the strange, pained expression on Isaac's face. There was something so sad in it that he simply could not handle. His tone slipped noticeably into cold formality. "But I came of age 2 years hence. I am no longer yours to give or to keep. If you truly care about my agency, then you will stop trying to dictate what I will or will not do, and leave that decision to me. If you do not, then you are no better than King Theor." Isaac looked so absolutely crushed for a second that Leo nearly tried to take back his words. He'd never seen him look so hurt by anything he'd said or done before. But then, this argument had been years in the making. He didn't know what he'd expected. A cold shadow eventually fell over Isaac's face, locking all vulnerability behind it. His lips set stubbornly, and he lifted his chin. "You may compare me to the king, but it is you who sound just like him." That actually made Leo take a few steps back, sharply drawing in a breath. Isaac went on. "If you are so very wise and independent, I see no reason for you to need my counsel on your journey to Spa. You may travel with King Theor alone, since you share such similar opinions." "Even you aren't that petty, Isaac," Leo declared tersely, trying to swallow his trepidation. Bitter or not, it would be better to have Isaac on the journey with him than go alone. "It's not petty to honor someone's wishes. If you do not wish for my involvement, then so be it." When Isaac began walking toward the door, Leo bolted in front of him to block his way in a panic, horrified that he might be in earnest. "You're twisting my words, Dad," he insisted. "I didn't at all say that I wanted you to stay behind." "I have no reason to be there," Isaac said, brushing past Leo. "If you cannot see what is plainly in front of you, I cannot bother trying to take the blinders from your eyes." "What makes you think you are not the blind one?" Leo asked furiously, as the giant lock opened and he followed Isaac out onto the flagstones. "Seeing everything from only one perspective seems fairly blind to me." "It matters not," Isaac spat back. "I would rather be blind than bear witness to this horrid strategy game." "I am not just his pawn," Leo cried, planting his feet and refusing to follow any further. "Can you not treat me like I have convictions of my own? Can you not think of anything outside your own little world?" That seemed to stop Isaac in his tracks, and Leo saw his hands close into fists. "You are my world. You are my son." The words were grated out, rough, sincere, and too loud for Leo to miss, even this far away. Isaac had kept his back to Leo as he said them, and didn't turn around, seeming to have surprised himself with the rawly honest statement. "Once you find yourself in Spa," Isaac finally said, voice more composed, but still sour, "you will see just how isolated and powerless your life there would be. Without the love of your country, your family, or your potential husband, you will understand exactly what kind of future awaits you there. And when you realize that, and return home, I hope you'll more greatly value this life you attempted to give up." Leo fought the anger that bubbled up, hearing Isaac predicting his future as though it was absolute. But before he could respond, Isaac added, "This villa is your own little world too, Leo. Do not forget that." When Isaac rounded the end of the garden and disappeared, Leo was tempted to kick the nearest tree trunk in his frustration and rage, but he could count on half of one hand the number of times he'd been stressed enough to lash out in such a manner,
Instead, he paced almost violently up and down the path, rubbing at his face and combing his fingers roughly through his hair as he did. Loud, strained gasps of angry breath escaped him as he fought the urge to scream. He felt cornered, trapped in a situation in which no outcome would feel right.
Oh dear, oh dear.
Leo whirled around at the sound of the voice. His rage only compounded when he saw King Theor standing there, a walking stick in his hand, flanked by 2 guards. He must have been strolling through the gardens on the other side of the hedge.
I seem to have intruded on a private argument. That would have been more private had you not been shouting at each other out in the open. Where on earth are your shoes, Leonardo?
Leo's vision nearly whited out. He was compelled to charge the 3 men and risk taking a stunner to the chest for the possibility of a good brawl. Perhaps trading blows or being stunned would provide a short escape from this insanity. He heaved in a few deep breaths to try and calm down, but as he turned his frown upon his father, he noted how uneasy the 2 guards appeared. King Theor even dropped his amused expression at once, staring at him warily.
You're a terrifying sight when you're angry, he said quietly. I'd forgotten.
I have a feeling it will be very hard for you to forget going forward, Leo threatened, if you consistently anger me.
That is hardly fair in this case, Leonardo,
Theor said, some levity returning to this voice.
Your eyes were like that before you had any idea that I was here. It was no fault of mine.
I do not need this right now. Excuse me, Leo said, exasperatedly as he sidestepped the group. You can revel in the disappointment that you're not the only one to push me so far.
Apparently not, Theor agreed lightly. It'll be a good decision for you and Isaac to spend some time apart, I should think, after that display.
Leo swung about so quickly that he definitely saw the guards flinch. For once, we may agree on something, he called in disbelief. And the sooner the better. King Theor responded at once, even though Leo had again turned to continue walking away.
In that case, I could arrange for us to leave tomorrow morning rather than the day after. Would that be agreeable to you?
Before he could think it over, Leo found himself answering with scathing surety over his shoulder. Perfectly agreeable. Leo marched straight back to his room, restraining himself yet again from slamming the door like he really wished to. He dropped down heavily on the edge of the mattress, head in his hands, as he tried to control his erratic breathing. He and Isaac had fought before, but this was so much worse, and the stakes were so much higher. Everything else they had ever disagreed upon seemed so silly and inconsequential, but he slowly realized that he had not been lying to Theor. He sincerely did want to leave Isaac behind now. What was the point dragging him along if all he would do was point out what Leo was doing wrong, how brainwashed he had become, or how ridiculous he was for even considering all options like a sensible adult? That realization seemed to bring him some strange clarity, if for no other reason than having control over something in all of this. Spurred on by this resolve, he stood and began packing a suitcase. Remembering what King Theor had said last night, he packed only what he thought he would need, leaving the most essential items for the next morning. He would have to ask what exact time they would be departing for the airship docks in the morning. The sooner the better, Leo mumbled to himself once more, as he placed his violin beside the suitcase. He had a sinking suspicion that it might be his only friend on the journey before him.